My name's Tom Hammond, okay, and I work for Wayne College in Oroville, so I'm a computer IT guy over there. That's my big thing, and I've been there for 33 years now, doing computer stuff and building computers and fixing them and doing projects and all sorts of cool things. And one of my hobbies at home is I do LED lights a lot, okay, and the kinds that animate, so they're called pixels, so each light can be any color you want. And so I do Christmas lights every year, so I'm a big LED person. You know, I've been doing it for about 6 or 7 years, and it's just one of my fun things I like to do. So learned a lot of things, you know, how to make these kind of things work and all that. So one of the projects that I thought would be kind of fun is this display here. And this is called a P5 panel, okay? So it's not the whole thing, it's actually the P5 panel, just the black part that you see here, okay? And these are usually used anywhere you see LED signs outside where they have the moving text and pictures. Those are all panels, LED panels.
There's one down Fairgrounds.
Yeah, so they're everywhere, okay? This kind is meant for indoor use, okay? So it's much more affordable. It's like $15, you know? The 5 in the P5 is the spacing between the lights. So and if you open your box up, your cardboard box, you'll see there's a panel in there. And if you look closely at it, you'll see all those little dots on it. So between every LED, okay, basically every pixel is 5 millimeters. Okay? And there's different kinds of panels you can get. There's like a P10 panel. So the spacing between the pixels is how many millimeters? 10. So they're spaced out further and they're bigger. There's P4 panels, which are really tight and the lights are really close to each other. So there's a big variety of different panels you can get. Okay. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to take one of these panels. Normally you put these side by side and stack them, you know, until you get a really big sign. But I thought it'd be kind of fun to have one of these and just make it portable. You can take it places and make it, you know, light up and have animations and text and all that kind of stuff and let it be battery powered. So that's what basically we invented. So this thing here is the panel, and we made a backing for it. So I'm going to take it off and show it to you really quick. Once we get it off. All this project is 3D printed. So you can pretty much, if you have a 3D printer, you can build this thing at home without having to buy any commercial framework parts and everything to build it.
Yeah.
So on this display, and the one that you have, the extra one right there, the heart of this thing is called a Raspberry Pi, and that's called a single board computer. So it's just a tiny little, it's got a processor, it's got memory on it, it's got a monitor connection, keyboard, mouse, and it's actually it's not the board you see right here. It's actually underneath this board. Just a tiny, really a $10 computer that can do things like this. It can run this display. So that's the heart of it. And then there's a battery, so you can take it places and not have to plug it in, which is kind of cool. And on the side here is a charging port. Okay, so that takes a cell phone charger, you know, micro USB, power switch, and the button can let you choose animations you want to play that you stored in this. So the Raspberry Pi on this is called a Raspberry Pi Zero, and that's the low cost, real small, affordable Raspberry Pi. But it has Wi-Fi built into it, Bluetooth built into it. Or at least it has Wi-Fi, I think it's Wi-Fi. And with that, you can connect to it with your laptop or your cell phone, and you can upload animations into it and control it. So you can either use your phone to choose what you want to show on this, or you can use this little button to switch between different animations that you've already got stored on this thing. Okay? So that's the whole idea. It's a Wi-Fi enabled light display. You can put it anywhere and control and do cool things with it. Okay? So what we're going to do is, this is sort of the overview of the entire class that we're doing. We're going to talk about how to assemble a frame that will attach to this, and that's what you put all your electronics on. So we have a 3D printed, you know, frame system with brackets and things that attach all the pieces and parts. So that's the first part. We actually put that frame together. The next part is we put all the electronics on it. So we got to put the Raspberry Pi on it, right? If you look closely at yours, the one that's already built, on top of the Raspberry Pi, that's called a hat. Okay, you see that ribbon cable coming out of it? And that hat lets the Raspberry Pi communicate with this LED panel. Okay, because the LED panel has a ribbon cable, and that's how it gets its data. So that hat is what you attach that ribbon cable to, and then it can go to the Raspberry Pi and they can talk with each other. Okay, so we're going to put all those pieces and parts together, all the little circuit boards and things like that. Okay. After that, we're going to test out everything, see if it's all wired up before we actually power it up for the first time. We can make sure we don't blow anything up. That's always important. And then the software is it's called public domain software. It's actually software you don't have to buy. There's people all over the world that have developed these different programs to make the lights animate and things. So it's a free system by people that put a lot of time into making cool things happen with lights. And their software can run anything from concerts to Christmas lights to football field displays, and they've all done this out of the generosity of their hearts and their time to make software that we can just use and enjoy. Okay, so there's two major programs that take care of it for what we're doing. One is called Falcon Player. Okay, Falcon Player goes on the Raspberry Pi. And do you know what Linux is?
Yes.
Okay, so the Raspberry Pi, its main operating system is Linux. So Linux runs off the Raspberry Pi, and then Falcon Player is the program put into Linux. Okay, and it basically does the Wi-Fi stuff. It can listen for your cell phone. It can choose what you want it to show. It plays back the animations. That's the big thing that Falcon Player does. Okay, so it lives on the Raspberry Pi. It has all your animations stored in it, and then it plays all the animations back. Okay, so basically Falcon Player is a player. It plays animations. Okay, there's more to it than just that, but that's part of it.
Kind of like a flash player on a computer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Okay. And then the animations that you make use a different program. Okay, and that's called Xlights. Okay, that's another free program, and you can run that off of your Windows computer. It also runs off of Linux, Apple, which is basically Linux. Those three main operating systems. So you make all your animations with Xlights on your main computer, whether you want moving text or graphics or cartoons, whatever you want, and then you save that as a file and load that in the Falcon Player onto this, and then plays it back. Okay?
Okay.
So tonight we're probably going to have the time to put this together, build it, make sure the hardware works, make sure it lights up okay, and then the next session we'll get into the software side of things. We'll actually, it depends on how time goes, we might have a third session.
Okay.
And probably what we'll do is we might even have a fourth session if you want to talk about more of the Xlights part of it, because that's the real fun part, is how you make your animations. You want to make some really cool stuff. Okay. So we'll do the Falcon Player and get a basic Xlights animation running, but then we can do another session where we just do cooler things with Xlights, because that's really you'll be spending most of your time wanting to mess around with it.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll see how things go.
Yeah.
Time. So the first thing we're going to do is we're building this plastic frame that holds everything. All right. Okay, hop on your web browser and go to Instructables.com. And then when you're there, in the search box on Instructables.com, that would be the top right where it says Let's Make, with that little search box up there.
Yep.
Type in the word raspberry, R-A-S-P-B-E-R-R-Y, space, the letter P is in Paul, and the number 5. So raspberry space P5. And if you haven't been to Instructables.com before, you can say it again, but that's a place where people build cool projects, and they share them with everybody in the world. Step by step how to build anything. It can be a recipe, how to make muffins, or it can be how to build a lightsaber, or how to build a planter, or how to crochet. People all over the world make these cool projects on Instructables.com and share them so other people can build them too. So this entire project, this light display, is on Instructables, as something you can step through on the internet. So we're going to use this as our step-by-step how to build this. Okay. So I gave you a sheet of paper there, which is a printout of that same project. So you can either follow the paper or you can follow the website. The paper is, the printed version is kind of strange. you'll see that as you flip through the pages, a lot of the writing is two columns. Well, maybe, yeah, some of it's two columns, some of it isn't.
Mhm.
And the columns normally flow from the bottom of the first column to the top of the next column.
Yeah.
But sometimes you'll see the column actually go to the next page, and then you got to come back to this page to continue on the second column. It's kind of weird. So you sort of have to read it and make sure you can sort of follow where the text is going. It didn't really print out as nice as I thought. But the website is easier to follow. Okay, so you might want to use a combination of both if you like. Okay. So
We can do that.
So we are on, if you look at the instructables, if you scroll down the website, okay, we'll get past what's needed to build this thing. And again, with this panel, this P5 panel, there are 32 rows, okay, this way, and 64 lights going this way. Okay, so there's actually over 2,000 lights on this that we can control, and many of those lights or pixels can be any color you want. Okay, so they all change dynamically with each other as you animate stuff. So there's a lot of lights in here, that tiny space to build stuff. Okay.
Is there a color limit, or are you pretty much?
No color limit. I think they can be thousands, if not millions of colors.
Wow.
Okay. And with the lights, like what an LED is, right? And an LED is typically, well, it is just one color. Okay, so an LED can be red, green, or blue, okay? And LEDs can be white, but if you want a spot here that can be any color you want, they mix colors together to get those other colors. So each one of these spots, these 2,048 spots, actually has 3 LEDs in each one. There's a red, and a green, and a blue.
Right.
And so each pixel has 3 LEDs inside of it. And when you mix those 3 colors together, then you get, over 1 million colors or whatever that you want to do with it. Okay. To get white, they make all 3 of those colors full brightness, and then they blend together to show white. Okay. Here's the parts that we're dealing with. That is your Raspberry Pi right there. Okay. There's pictures. So I'm just going to take you through the pictures real quick. So it's more fun. Okay, we do have a battery that is probably over here, but we're not going to use it until later. So this is the frame that we have up here that we're going to be building. All right? And you have a lid. This is one part of the system here. And then you have all this framework stuff, again, that we're building. Right? So we're actually going to be putting together all this live framework right now. And again, all these parts are 3D printable. So if you read that instructable on this project, you'll see a link to Thingiverse. Have you been there before? Have you heard of that? Okay. If you ever get a 3D printer from home,
It's in the works.
what's that?
We'd like to.
Yeah.
Good people.
Thingiverse is where people make cool 3D printed designs and they share them on the internet for other people to make. So if they made a cool, like a gadget or a toy or some kind of tool, they could share that design, that shape on Thingiverse, and other people could download it and make it on their own printers. So all of these 3D printed parts come with your kit, because we're doing this as a class. But if you ever break one of these parts, or if you want to reprint them to make another one of these displays, it has a link to that Thingiverse page where you can download all these pieces and parts and make them again. Okay, so it's all the stuff you just download and use. Okay, so this instructable just tells you how to print them, what's the best settings to use to make them come out nice, that kind of thing. So we're not going to do that here because we already have all the parts. So let's start with you have these different bags in front of you. They're labeled step 4, step 5, step 6. See all those different bags? Okay. We're going to open those bags up one at a time and, take the parts out and build these projects with those bags. Okay. So if you open up your step 4 bag, right here. Let's see what we have inside of it. So we have 2 frame pieces, 2 big pieces, and the way these work is they will join in the middle, and bolt together so they stay together. We'll be doing that, fairly soon. Okay, so that's the frame. And we have this one piece here, which this is what holds the Raspberry Pi. Okay, this will actually bolt onto the frame. So we have that one. We have this one here, which has like a little, leaf on the side of it. This is what's going to hold the, what I call the power distribution block. So on our project, if you look on the project here, that's this thing right below the battery. So it's where this is the central power hub where everything gets its power from. So this sled is what you attach that terminal block to. And what else do we have? We have the terminal block, which goes on that sled, right? Okay. This little long piece is the battery holder. Okay. And I had a fella work with me a lot on this, and he made this a really nice put together thing. Okay, and then you have your electrostatic bag. Do you have it in your kit? Okay, and that is your Raspberry Pi. I think, do you have that in there? You shouldn't have that yet, but maybe you do. Yes, that's right. You would have this in here. Okay, so this is the single board computer. This is what runs the show. Okay.
Yep, it's in there.
And on this Raspberry Pi, I'll just let you look at the plugs on it, because you buy these, and make other projects with them. Especially if you go to Instructables.com, and if you type in the search term Raspberry Pi 0, you'll see all sorts of projects that build things with this, and step by step how you build cool things. So it's a great way to start. And if you look at the board, you're going to have these two plugs, these two little silver plugs down here. Okay, so if you hold the pins at the top, that 40-pin connector at the top, and you're looking at the bottom right has those two silver plugs. They're micro USB. One is for power, and the other one is it's a USB port for like plugging in a keyboard or mouse, or a USB hub so you can have both. On the other side of that board, that bigger silver connector, that is what's called a micro HDMI. So with an adapter, you can plug that into a regular HDMI cable and plug it into a TV or a computer monitor that has that port. And then at the top, you have that big long row of pins. That's called a 40-pin header. This is what you run your projects with. So if you wanted your project to have buttons, that you can press to make it do things, your buttons would wire into this. Or if you had LED lights, they could actually run lights off of this. Or you can make it have sensors. If you have a light sensor or you're building a robot, some of these pins provide power, some of them provide ground, some are data, like a sensor, so the Raspberry Pi can sense what you're connecting it to. The left side of the board, that big silver flat thing right there, that's a memory card holder. That's the hard drive on your Raspberry Pi. It holds all your programs, holds all your data, that kind of thing. And it uses a micro SD memory card just like a cell phone does. And then we're not going to use this, but on the right side, that white little flat plastic thing, that's for a camera. So if you want your Raspberry Pi to take pictures or sense motion or do that kind of thing, you can actually buy a special camera that plugs right into that through a flat resin cable. So that's our Raspberry Pi. So in that bag, that is all we have, except for a whole bunch of nuts and bolts. So what we're going to do is we're going to bolt this thing together, literally. All right. So let me take out all these pieces of hardware. And what we'll do is we'll start with joining these two together, these two pieces. So if you put them, against each other, there's one center hole, that joins them together. So we're going to start with bolting that together. So just take one bolt, put it through both frames, and then attach it with a nut.
I think I see.
And if you have an adjustable wrench, that would help get you don't need the wrench. One thing you could do is just hold the nut with one hand, and then tighten it with the screwdriver, tighten the bolt up a little bit. And that might be just enough to, be strong enough to hold it decently.
but he's got this. Okay, how did you do that?
What's that?
Oh, can you hold that up?
Okay. We're gonna take, the frame has a flat side to it, both frames.
Yeah.
Where it's all flat. Sort of set the, put the frame together so it looks like this.
Let me see something.
Now the side with all the holes in it, the ports, you know, you want to keep that on the right side of you. Okay, so on your right side. And then it's going to basically just put it down on the table for now. And then get your light display. And then this, your LED panel. What we're going to do with this guy is, make sure I have this correct. You're going to see some arrows on it. You see those big arrows? Those different, you know, there's an arrow pointing down and an arrow pointing to the left. If I hold it this way. And what we're going to do is focus on the corner holes. There's 4 corner holes, right? Mm-hmm. And then if you look at the frame, there's a hole in the middle where they come together, mm-hmm. and there's a hole at the bottom middle where they come together. Mm-hmm. So we're going to worry about those 6 bolts. Okay. So once you put the frame on, we're going to take 6 bolts, you know, 4 for the corners, and lock it down the frame. Now when you tighten the bolts on, just sort of put them on loose at first. Don't really tighten it down until they're all put in. Gotcha. That way, if the frame needs to shift a little bit while you're getting it attached, it sort of finds its place. So once you have all 6 of them in place and somewhat bolted down, then you can tighten them all down. So we're doing 6 bolts for the corners and 2 for the middle. Okay, so the frame is now on the P5 panel, which is good. Let's grab this bracket right here, and this is the bracket that the processor will attach to the Raspberry Pi. Okay. You'd like to hold it so that the ear is downward facing, right? And then it's going to go on, don't do it just yet, but if I show it to you, it's going to go on the right side of the whole assembly, like this, okay? That's where it's going to sit, on the right-hand side. So, and you'll notice this bracket has 4 holes on the top and bottom. You notice the bracket has 4 holes on it as well. Now to make the bolts latch onto something and grip, here's the trick. You'll notice when you look at the frame where those holes are, you're going to see on the side of the frame some slots, some rectangular slots. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That is the place where you insert the nuts. So you basically put the nuts in where those rectangular slots are, and you sort of have to push them in. And it's a little bit tricky to do because they barely fit. So that way they don't fall out again. So the trick is if you take a screwdriver and you go to like the flat end of the screwdriver, like the blade, and you have to be careful when you do this because if you slip with the screwdriver, you might like slip and skin yourself. But basically, you want to push in those nuts into those holes so that you can see, you know, the nut is all the way in there and the bolt will line up into it. So basically, I push one nut into that slot far enough in so that I can see all the way down through the hole and through the nut as well. And so they look pretty well aligned. So you're going to take 4 of those nuts and put them in those 4 slots. It's a cool idea. I learned about it from a printer company called Prusa, and that's how they assembled some of their stuff. You know, and I thought, well, that's pretty clever. So I started doing the same thing for this thing, and it turned out pretty nice. So again, when you're pushing on it with the screwdriver, be very careful you don't slip and hurt yourself. I've done it many times.
Yeah, I think we'll see that.
Some of them will fit in easier than others. It depends on how well the 3D printer is.
I got them too.
Some 3D printers are more accurate than others, so they can print these slots better than some printers can. So I've got the 4 nuts inserted into those 4 slots on the side of the frame. Okay, so now on the sled, okay, we have the 4 holes on either end where you put the bolts through. But before we do that, let's get the Raspberry Pi mounted on this first. All right. Now you're going to see in the middle of the sled, you're going to see 4 sockets, like 4 holes. And if you look really closely at it, they're actually hexagonal shaped, just like the nuts are. So if you're really careful, you can put 4 nuts in those holes and push them down into the screwdriver. So they don't go
I
anywhere.
work well for pushing them down.
You have to sort of use the tip of the screwdriver, you know, of the flat blade to sort of make sure to push down all the way in flat. And you can also use you can tap it in with a hammer. So we have those in. Now for the Raspberry Pi part, there are 4 holes in it, okay? So it's going to basically mount on top of this. And we're going to position it so that you still have the funny, the ports, you know, these holes on the frame facing the right, correct? All right. The Raspberry Pi, that long 40-pin connector is going to face the left. So when we put this, and the sled, remember that ear? So the ear is going to face your right. So the Raspberry Pi is going to face the left and sit on top of that. So the ear is on the right, the 40-pin connector, as you set it down on top of that, is on the left.
Okay.
Now there's a special way we're going to mount it on here. You're going to use 4 bolts, like so. And you're going to, these holes in the Raspberry Pi are barely big enough to hold the bolt. Okay, they won't just slide right in. So what you do is you sort of start it with your fingers, or you can put it on the platform. And if you apply a little bit of pressure, they'll start going through those holes.
Okay.
Okay? So before you even put it on that sled, you want to start the bolts on first. So you might want to put it on a flat surface maybe, and just sort of, and be careful that your screwdriver doesn't slip and then hit the circuit board when you're pushing down. But you'll feel the bolt starting to go through the hole. And right when the bolt starts reaching the bottom of the circuit board, stop and don't put it any further. So you're going to have 4 bolts sort of sticking out of the circuit board from the top.
Do you want to do it?
And the bottom of the bolt's going to be a little bit flush with the bottom of the circuit board. And again, just be very careful when you're turning those in, because if you put too much pressure, you might crack the circuit board.
Okay.
Now, one thing we found is the bracket, that ear on the side of it, that's going to hold, well, you have one terminal block for all your power connections. Okay, that's on the left side of on the finished project over there. We're going to have another one of these terminal blocks that attaches to the Raspberry Pi bracket, and this is going to help run the button. Okay, the different resistors and wires are needed to make the button work. So eventually we're going to put one of these right on, on this bracket. The problem is when you get the Raspberry Pi on the bracket, and then you put that special LED hat on top of the Raspberry Pi, that LED hat can touch the top of this. Okay, so that can be a problem. We don't want to short anything out. So we're going to try an idea. On your table, it wasn't in your bag, because it's something new, is you have these 4 white spacers. See those? So what I'd like you to try to do for me is keep screwing the bolts in so that the spacers can fit underneath it. So there's plenty of room for the spacer too. We're gonna try to lift the Raspberry Pi a little bit higher so it doesn't touch that terminal block it's gonna be beside it. So go ahead and screw in the bolts a little bit more so they'll clear those spacers. The goal is you want the bolt to be flush with that spacer. If it doesn't work, we'll do something else. It looks like to me the spacers are not quite big enough to hold those bolts nicely, so you may have to finagle them in. If it doesn't work out, we'll do something different. You might have to hold the spacer right close to the circuit board. Like I would put the spacer on the table with the circuit board on top and then tighten the bolt, so you're putting pressure on that spacer. That may work. Yeah, so have the bottom of the bolt just barely protruding out of the spacer underneath, okay? You are much more mechanically inclined than I am. And the trick to putting these bolts on with the nuts underneath is the bolts may not go, you can't tighten the bolt all the way down because the bolts are too long. So basically you just turn the bolts just enough so that you know they're gripping into those nuts underneath, and then you stop. So the tops of the bolts will actually extend over the Raspberry Pi just a little bit. They're not going to go flush with the circuit board.
Okay.
And that's okay, that won't hurt anything. Just enough to hold it in place. That should be okay. Just a little bit more. And you do want the bolts to go, enough in so that there's two bolts near that 40-pin connector. You want to make sure the bolt is inserted at least far enough down so it doesn't interfere with plugging things into that 40-pin connector.
Okay.
Because we're going to need that connector. Oh, that's better. Then you have the bolts slightly extending past the spacer just a little bit, so they'll
So
fit into
they'll
they'll touch the nuts, and then you can tighten it up. Yeah. And again, the 40-pin connector. So if I'm pointing towards the camera, it's on the left of the ear. So we have the Raspberry Pi circuit board attached to that bracket, right?
Yes.
This terminal block is what's going to be used to run the button. Okay, the wiring for the buttons. So the way it works is take the clear cover off of the terminal block. It just pulls off from the top. It's just a press fit. You guys have to wiggle the top to remove it. It's a little. You got it? Okay. You'll notice on your bracket with the ear on the side, you have two holes there. See the two holes on there? So the terminal block will go on top of that, and there's no nut securing it. It's just basically the threads of the bolt holding it in place. So you're going to put that bolt through the terminal block into that hole on the bottom, and it's just going to be a friction. When you tighten it, don't tighten it so much that it goes through the plastic and then eats up the plastic underneath, and then it won't hold it anymore.
Okay.
So just slowly tighten it until you feel like it's stopping from turning, and then don't turn it anymore. Okay, otherwise it will damage the hole.
Okay. Huh? No, you're going wrong. Lefty loosey, righty righty.
Right. So we're just going to start that bolt right in there and tighten it. And then the bottom of that bolt will actually, if you look at me for a second, it'll actually come flush to the bottom of your bracket. Don't let it.
We are good.
Cool. All right. So now we're going to take the frame and the LED panel and make sure the arrows are pointing down towards you. Remember those arrows? The arrows have to point to you, at you. Then you take your bracket with the terminal block is on your right, and you just sit it on those 4 holes that you put those nuts in, and then you put some bolts in through the top. and they'll grip those nuts underneath and hold it in place. And you don't have to tighten them very, very strong. You know, there's nothing, it doesn't have to be super torqued down or anything. Just when you feel the nut starting to grab it, that's probably all you need. And again, it's a good idea to sort of put it in without tightening it down too much until you get all four in, so the bracket centers itself, and then you can tighten them all down. Now, the next thing we're going to put on is this bracket right here. Okay, it says, this is for the power distribution terminal block. So it's got the ear that points vertical like this. Okay, so the ear is going to face the top away from you.
Okay.
All right. And if you look at your bracket on the bottom, to me, on my bottom, there's two holes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you put in a couple of nuts, and then you bolt it on. Okay, so that's all. But before we do that, let's actually get the terminal block on it first. Let's do that first.
Okay. How about you work with him and I'll work on putting the holes in?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. But you gotta stay over there.
Sit.
So now the terminal block, the other one, the second one, is actually in a different bag. So go to your step 5 button bag. I think it's you'll see a bag with another one of these terminal blocks. Just grab it. Now, one thing about this terminal block is, remember with the other one, you just put the bolt right through it and grip it on the plastic? This bracket has the side slots for nuts, so it holds it very securely. So you got to insert you have to insert nuts on the top and the bottom of that bracket, and then you can bolt the terminal block in place. Okay, it holds it a lot more, a lot tighter. So all those little nut slots that are so fun to work with, get to do some more.
Okay, let's see. We gotta put some nuts in there.
And one thing I noticed about this particular bracket that I'm working with is the 3D printer left some plastic inside of that hole. I see just a tiny little piece of plastic in that hole, which could obstruct the bolt from going through. So I'm going to try to find some kind of tool to clean that hole out a little bit.
No.
I'm not exactly sure if I can do that with this tool. That might make it difficult to get a bolt through there. So it's good to look through these holes to make sure the 3D printer didn't leave anything behind that could cause trouble. Just to make sure those holes are nice and clean. There we go. So I'm going to insert a nut into this sled.
Oh, you're putting that in the sled.
Into this, remember those side slots?
Oh, in here.
There's one on each side.
Gotcha.
So you're going to insert it far enough in so that the hole lines up with that nut. And if it doesn't look like it's lining up perfectly, you can actually take a very fine tip screwdriver and stick it in that hole and then push the nut into a better position.
Yeah.
That might help a little bit too. And actually I'm going to take a bolt without even put the terminal block on, just sort of, maybe I can help center the nut a little bit in that hole just by forcing it a little bit. Or not, let's see. Yeah, that's working. See what I did? I took a bolt, even though I didn't have the terminal block on, I put it through the hole anyway to get it so the nut would sort of slide itself into place if it wasn't perfectly aligned inside.
Oh, gotcha. Have you got partially in?
Yeah, and then I'll take the bolt back out just to
Gotcha.
help
I'm
it.
getting now.
Help it stay put where it needs to be. There we go. Okay, so the nuts are in
There's one.
each side of the bracket. And then I'm going to put the terminal block on top of it and bolt it down.
They're actually running too far. You know let that happen?
Now I think
Well, it's
if you
double-sided.
put that nut in too far,
It's double-sided.
if you put the nut too far into that slot and it goes past the hole, there's a slot on the other side of that area where you can push the nut back into its right place. So by the time we're done, we have the power distribution block sled. You have a block attached really nicely to the sled so it doesn't move around at all.
Got it.
Yeah, this printer is really nice stuff on parts overall. And the printer that made this is pretty likely it's one of the printers that we build in one of the classes for the Chance Makerspace.
Oh, nice.
You know, so the same printer that you actually build can make these parts pretty nicely. Okay, so you put the sled on the frame so that the ear is facing away from you onto those two holes, remember? And then put the bolts in. Hold it in place. It's kind of hard when you have black 3D printed parts on a black frame.
I've only been there 4 years, so.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
You drive the school bus?
Got it?
Yeah, take your time.
Awesome. Good.
All right. Now, the last part to put on, and then the frame is done. This is the battery holder. And on the holder, there are 2 holes for the bolts. And then if you look at the frame, and near the top left part, you'll see a hole here and a hole here. All right? And your favorite activity is putting those nuts in those slots, right? So each one of those holes, there's a slot on this side for the nut,
Okay.
and a slot in this little corner up here. So we got to put nuts in there so the bolts have something to grip onto. Oop.
Okay, so this one at least was printed well, and it's going in well, which is nice.
Turned out pretty easy. Okay, now the battery bracket, you have these 2 large holes. See that on the side of it? These 2 large holes. Okay, if you look at your other bracket here, your sled for the power block, it has 2 large nubs. So they actually fit together. See, they actually fit into each other. And then you can bolt the, then the holes will line up where you can put the bolts in on the frame. So basically put the battery holder in those large nubs first to get it lined up, and then bolt it down. There it goes. And I think it's going to work well. Okay. So that is our frame. So we have Raspberry Pi here. This is the terminal block to run the button for the resistors and wire that's needed for that. This terminal block is to run the power for the whole system, you know, to provide power to everything. And this little cup here is to hold the battery.